The following episode contains explicit content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Michael, you can't be doing this. You know this isn't right. You go to a Christian school, you're going to church, you can't be doing this kind of stuff. All things that I knew, things that I felt convicted about, realized I shouldn't be doing it, but my flesh was so strong and I was so isolated in those moments that it just kept ensnaring me.
I was made to walk in the valley. I was built to stand in the storm. There's a peace deep inside me that cannot last any war. I have faced the dark and the danger. They can't scare me anymore. 'Cause I was made to walk in the valley. I was built to stand in the storm.
This is the Nook podcast. My name is Stephen Murphy, and I am more than a little stirred to bring you this episode and this entire 4-week series. If you heard the tease for this series at the end of last week's episode, or maybe a friend sent you a link to check this out, I want to take just a moment and state my logic for doing a series like this. I'll just say it. Pornography is an incredibly sad element in the world. It's a very unhealthy view of something that should be so sacred, secret, and guarded against. I will also come right out and say that I am not the least bit swayed by any excuse ever given to justify viewing it in any form. 1 Corinthians 6:18 says to run from sexual sin. No other sin so clearly affects the body as this one does. For sexual sin is a sin against your own body. I believe that we, the collective church, need to be having more discussions like this. I recognize that in doing so, more of us need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Picture yourself standing in the back of your church this weekend while your pastor gets up in front of the congregation and announces that he's going to take the next 4 weeks and talk about nothing but pornography. Can you imagine the corporate squirming in the seats? And the handful of people who just get up and go bolting for the door. All by itself, that level of discomfort should tell you a couple of things. One, this is a shameful thing, and I don't say that to cast shame. I'm just recognizing what I believe is true. Two, there are probably more people than any of us would actually like to know who are actively engaged in viewing porn on a regular basis. And the last thing they would be expecting was for it to be openly discussed in church. I believe that if more issues like this were not only discussed openly, but that the church had loving and non-judgmental ways of restoring people dealing with such unmentionables, that our churches, communities, and especially families would be so much healthier. No matter what brought you here today, I hope you will commit to listening to the entire series. I believe that so much can be gleaned. It is my distinct honor to introduce you to two people who are very dear to me, my friends Mike and Erin. I am beyond grateful that they are so willing to share so much of the story that they are still walking through. This week, we will start with Mike. His issue began long before he even met Erin, and yet it would eventually have such a devastating effect on her. This is Dirty Little Secret, Episode 1, The Confession. We're going to dive right in. Talk to me about the first time that you were exposed to pornography as far as you remember.
The first time I remember vividly what happened, I can't quite remember how old I was. I think I was maybe 9 or 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
Small child.
Wow.
I was at a carnival with my family, and I went to a porta potty there just to use the bathroom. And there was parts of a magazine kind of stuffed in the corner next to the toilet there.
Wow.
And of course, I'm curious. And so I pick it up, and there's pictures of naked women on there.
Wow.
I had never seen anything like that before. Didn't know really how to process that or what to do with it. I put it back down, did my business and left, but I was intrigued by it. And so I made up that I had to go to the bathroom again a short time later just to go back in.
Same day.
Oh yeah, same day.
Wow.
I mean, we're talking a short period of time, half hour, hour later, just to go back in and get another visual of what that was. And the magazine was gone. So I don't know who saw it, who took it, how it got placed there. It was just that was my first experience.
Where did things become more, obviously, I think any 9, 10-year-old boy is probably going to have a very similar response. What happened as you got older? If I could say, if we can kind of say that, marking that as a point in time, what happened the next few years for you?
From that point, nothing happened for years to come until I was in high school and started, I had some bodily changes prior to high school, obviously. Sure. But then at that point, when high school came about, even though I was at a Christian school, the boys were talking about things that they would look at, things that they would see and do. And so that's when it started to escalate back up again. And from listening to their experiences and avenues that they had found to access that, and then having internet connection at the house when I was growing up, we had it was the old AOL, right? And so it was all this dial-up sounds and all this very slow internet, and you were connecting to whatever you could find. And as a teenager who's horny, obviously, you get what you can find, you know, and you run with it. And I also remember being up late at night. I used to play video games a lot when I was a kid, and my parents would be sound asleep. And I would just get tired of playing video games. I would turn that off and just turn on the TV just to see what was on to watch because, I'm not ready to go to bed yet.
Right.
And I came across a channel that was just all these squiggly lines of color, and there was this weird music playing, and you couldn't really make out much. But if you stared and strained your eyes hard enough, you could make out what was happening between a man and a woman.
Yes.
And then once I found that channel, I found myself going back to it over and over again. Between that and then having the internet access, that's when it came full circle. And it was from that point on, it grabbed me and it never let go. So
was it constant? Was it any chance you could kind of a thing?
Yeah. It would be after school. It would be late at night. Any time when I was at the house by myself. Yeah. Any moment that I had.
When we first talked about you coming on and doing this, you told me that you were like any high school kid who's grown up in church. You were in youth group, and that your youth pastor would talk about this as a subject. When he would do that, when the topic would come up there, how did that land for you?
And going back a little further, from the time I was in kindergarten, I was in a Christian school all the way through high school. Grew up in a Christian home, very loving home. Went to church consistently from the time I was little. Even when it was up to myself in high school to go, I would still go during the weeknights and hang out with friends and listen to the message. And then we would do youth group, and the youth pastor would give his normal speech, right? That would come up every once in a while, especially when you're dealing with teens, of, pornography is bad and you shouldn't be looking at it, and you need to avoid masturbation, and all these kind of taboo topics at the time that you really don't talk about outside of youth group. Yeah. Those were things that would be consistently preached. And of course I knew growing up in that Christian environment my whole life that I knew morally that looking at those things and actively participating in it was wrong. Yeah. So I understood what he was saying. But that's as far as it was taken. It was always, this is wrong, you shouldn't be doing it. And that was kind of the same message that I got from my parents at home. There were a couple instances where they would find DVDs, or they would look at the internet search history, and they would see what was going on, and they would confront me about it. I would admit to it, and they would tell me the same things. Like, Michael, you can't be doing this. This isn't right. You go to a Christian school, you're going to church, you can't be doing this kind of stuff. All things that I knew, things that I felt convicted about, realized I shouldn't be doing it, but my flesh was so strong and I was so isolated in those moments that it just kept ensnaring me, and I would just keep doing it over and over again. And so that's as far as the help went. It was never like,
well, you got scolded in both instances is what it sounded like, but that's it. I mean, did anybody ever offer even prayer, let alone
no,
help?
The scolding, I think, was justified, right?
Oh, sure.
Because it's not something I should be doing.
Yeah.
But then follow that up with something. Okay,
Yeah.
you know you shouldn't be doing this, and now we're going to help you get out of it.
Yeah.
So we're going to set you up with someone, we're going to take you somewhere, do whatever it is, but it never reached that point. And so, and as a teenager, looking at the situation where I was, I felt shamed, and I felt like, oh my gosh, I've really failed, and this is a bad deal now that I'm in. And I never looked at it from the perspective of even asking for help. I didn't even think to ask for, or to tell them, hey, I know I shouldn't be doing this, but can you please help me set up with a pastor or with someone to get counseling? And it just, looking back now, I realized that, man, I should have done that. But as a kid, my mind wasn't even there.
Your teenage brain doesn't process things like that unless somebody older and wiser says, hey, man, this is something you very likely are not going to be able to get ahead of by yourself.
Correct. And even though I knew that I shouldn't be doing it, it almost felt normalized because all my friends were doing it and talking about it. And it just, and these are guys who were going to a Christian school and grew up in loving Christian homes. And so, and that's not to justify anything, but it's just like, it felt almost normalized. Like, well, everybody else is doing it. All the other boys are. So maybe this is just a phase and I'll get out of it and it'll be fine.
I go back to high school and what we would have always called locker room talk. It was more about actual conquests with girls, and oh man, you're dating her now? And the dudes want the dish on how things are going between you and that young lady. You're talking about guys swapping stories of what, where they have found a new source, or I'm literally just curious what that kind of banter is like, because that would be completely new to me.
It's similar to that, I guess you would say, in finding new avenues, or and they would say, hey, I watched this movie that just came out, and there's a scene of this woman, and they're, and so we would talk about that kind of stuff. So then it's like, okay, well, I need to rent this movie when I get the opportunity, right, to go see this. Or one guy would rent it, and then in the process of, there was a certain company back then that would have the ability to rent it and keep it for a week, to get to return it. So then you're passing it around, or you're coming over to that person's house, and everybody's kind of taking turns watching that particular scene. And it was what I thought was going to be a phase that I was going to maybe grow out of or get out of, and that things would be fine, quickly turned into, this is now an addiction. That feeling that I kept getting, I didn't want to lose it.
Yeah.
Even though I knew what I was doing was wrong.
That's that dopamine. Yeah. So, okay, just because you were talking about how you were confronted, whether it was your parents or a youth pastor, you felt guilty. You felt shame. You said that. In any of those moments, did it ever occur to you, or were you still too young or naive to think, wow, this really is a problem? Because I'm sure you heard about people being strung out on drugs or teenage drinking and all those things that kind of get their own category. But porn somehow has always remained in its own strange lane where, we know it's there, but we just don't talk about it. So had it occurred to you that this was truly an addiction?
It did not. And I don't know why it didn't. I remember being younger in youth group and hearing while I was in youth group that you shouldn't be masturbating, you shouldn't be looking at pornography. But then when I would attend what we called big church on Sunday morning or on Tuesday nights or whenever it was, the pastor never brought it up, but he would bring up topics of people who were addicted to drugs or alcohol and now they're free. And sometimes they would bring those people up on stage and they would tell their story, and everybody
Let's have a testimony.
Yeah. And everybody would clap and cheer. And then sometimes it'd be followed up with like a baptismal. So they would get baptized. They're fresh and clear in Christ, and, everything is good. But there was never that moment of celebrating someone who had an addiction to pornography and now they're free of it and we're going to hear their story.
Yeah.
It was almost like that was a very taboo subject.
Oh, yeah.
It's something we don't talk about. It's very dirty, you know? So if you're doing it, what's wrong with you kind of thing?
Seriously.
And so then that makes me feel like now I just need to recluse more and I need to be even tighter about what I'm doing and much more quiet. So, because if anyone finds out what I'm doing, they're going to think I'm dirty. I'm going to lose friends. I'm going to be mocked. And I think that is a tactic used very well by the devil to keep you in that isolation, to keep you fearful of what's going to happen if someone finds out what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, and it's like you will guard your secret with your life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so you get into your 20s. This is still a problem.
Mm-hmm.
You meet Erin. You start dating. What was life like for you or for the both of you back then? What do you remember about that time?
Life was great during that time. I was young. I was in my 20s, had the world by the tail, it seemed like. I had a good, stable job, had my own apartment, had my own car. Everything was going really well. And life was seemingly set up for success. I was early 20s. I was 23 when we started dating. We dated for about 9 months. And then we were engaged for another 9 months after that.
Okay.
25 by the time we got married. I was 25, she was 23.
Okay. With all of that and this secret that you're still guarding like crazy, was the marriage, was the engagement, all of that, was it enough of a distraction or did you just?
No. So it was actually very easy for me to hide it from her during the dating and engagement period because we lived in 2 separate states. And so I would only go and visit her once every other weekend to make that drive to see her and then come back. And then I'm by myself again in my apartment. And so it was very easy to hide that. And there were multiple periods throughout our dating, engagement, and marriage even where she asked me, hey, you don't struggle in pornography, right? Oh, no, that's not a problem for me. You know, it used to be when I was in high school and, you know, then that was it. I was over it. And sometimes she would even say, hey, I know, you know, so-and-so struggles with it. And we've kind of talked about it before and there's a message about it, but I know you don't struggle with it, right? No, I don't struggle with it. It's not a problem for me.
Yeah. Quick deflect and change the subject.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you view marriage, heading into marriage, did you have a thought, this will fix me?
I did.
Well, I'm going to get married. I'm going to have a wife.
Yep.
I'm going to get to sleep with this lady every night. That should fix it. Did you think that was going to just alleviate the issue for you?
I absolutely thought that because I thought that ultimately it was about that feeling and it was about the desire to be intimate with someone. At the time, I had the only opportunity to be intimate was with a virtual being, right? And I thought that once I got married and I have an actual physical female person that I can be intimate with, that my desire will now transfer from visual pornography into my present wife.
You just transfer.
Yeah. Made sense, right? It did not do that at all.
Yeah.
It kept me tied into that isolation pornography, masturbation cycle. Yeah. And then our marriage suffered from it because we would be intimate in our marriage, but it was far and few between because I was being satisfied in another way.
Yeah. Once you were married, were you ever worried that she was going to catch you?
Oh yeah, constantly. I was in constant fear that I was going to be caught by her. Because now we're married, we're living in the same household. So now I have to be really strategic, right? I really have to pick my moments well of when I'm going to do this because I know I shouldn't be doing it, but again, I don't know how to stop doing it. So I just need to get really good about hiding it because if she ever does catch me, if she ever does find out what I'm doing, what's going to happen? Yeah. Is she going to divorce me? Am I going to be paying child support?
Especially after you had denied it so many times.
Right. Are my kids now going to grow up in a divorced home like the way that I did as a child and have to go through that? That was hard for me as a child to go through that. And I don't want that for my kids. Yeah. So I need to do whatever I can to hold this close and keep anyone from ever finding out about this.
Yeah. Well, if I could get into your kitchen just a little bit, do you feel like your marriage, your time with Erin paid a price because that's ultimately what you were thinking of in the way of your own satisfaction.
Yeah, absolutely. Our marriage did suffer because of my addiction to pornography. I would see women that I thought were very attractive online and comparing them to the way that I viewed her physically was very different. And so I found myself not being physically attracted to her anymore. Yeah. Because she, in my mind, she didn't compare, she didn't add up to what I was seeing visually online. And that played a big role in our intimacy together as husband and wife. It was very infrequent, and it was something that we really struggled with for years.
At some point, just not so very long ago, Erin listened to a really good message from Mike Todd.
I did not have this, and it made me make a lot of mistakes and hurt a lot of people because I did not know how to aim at the goal that God wanted from our relationships. And today, I want us to go deeper into this thing, because today it's gonna be kind of emotional for me, because this is personal today.
If you're not familiar with Mike Todd, he is the lead pastor of Transformation Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. While in a sermon series about relationships in the summer of 2020, Pastor Todd shared a startling admission.
I have a public confession to make. And thousands of people are watching, and I'm just gonna say it. I have been in an abusive relationship for over 2 decades. I've been in an abusive relationship for over 2 decades, and it has not been with Pastor Natalie. I've been with another. And today, I'm calling names, because this relationship almost robbed me of everything that God promised me. And the person I've been in an abusive relationship with, her name is Pornography. And the crazy thing about it is, I'm not the only one that she's been visiting. There are thousands, if not millions of people watching this right now, and you've been in the same abusive relationship thinking you were the only one, but being damaged from the inside out. And today, I'm coming to put this nasty, foul spirit that has been walking secretly the halls of people's minds, thoughts, and relationship, ravaging families and generations. And I am coming to put it on Front Street today. And that thing on the inside of you that's uncomfortable, it's that spirit trying to bind you. But today, I am coming to tell the truth.
Then how does she say to you, hey, listen to this message from a pastor in Oklahoma? Was it random?
It seemed to be random. And I never went back and asked her about it. She just came to me one day. She loves to listen to podcasts. Yeah. And I'm not a big podcast guy. I can't just sit and listen to stuff for a while.
We're still friends.
No offense. The Nook is fantastic. Everyone should continue listening. Yeah. So she brings it up to me on her phone. And she says, hey, I came across this podcast, and here's this well-known pastor in Oklahoma, and he has admitted in front of his entire congregation that he has struggled with pornography. I know it's not something that you deal with, Mike, but just listen to it because it's really good.
What did your heart do in that moment?
Even though I'm not a podcast guy, something inside of me was like, Mike, you need to listen to this. Just listen to it and see what happens. So I'm listening to his podcast, and he's very graphic and he's very detailed in his struggle that he had. While he's explaining the struggle that he's in, I'm understanding it because I'm living it. Yeah. This is a struggle for me too. Not at the depths that he was into, but still a struggle nonetheless. I get closer to the end of the message, and I'm still thinking, even though I'm struggling in this, I still can't say anything. I still need to keep this quiet. I still need to deny that I have a problem in this because of all that I can lose here. Toward the end of his message, he says something along the lines of, now ladies, I'm going to speak to you.
Wives, let me talk to you for a second. This is going to be the first time that some of your husbands tell you the truth. I feel this so strongly in my spirit that remember, God can only do work in the truth, and they've been scared because they actually do love you. And if they told you, they know it would hurt you and break your heart, and it will. But I'm asking you to lovingly restore them with grace. Be what they need now, and then y'all can heal together. But there's some men listening to this. Today's the day. You get to come out. You get to tell the truth. You get to live in real freedom. And yes, there's gonna be consequences. But do you know what happens when the enemy loses his power over your life? You experience freedom. I have been free from pornography for over 5 years. And when I
heard him say that, I knew in that moment that I had to tell Erin what I've been addicted to for all these years.
Yeah. Was it immediately? Was it that same day? You've got little ones at home. It's not like you can just announce something like that at dinner, but...
I did.
Oh, did you?
I did. As soon as I felt I was crying as I was hearing all of this. So I come down the steps. She's down there making dinner. The kids are playing, watching a show, whatever they're doing. And she looks at me and she sees me crying. And she says, "What? Do you need to tell me something?" And I said, "Yeah. I struggle with pornography." And that's where the conversation that's where everything began.
What do you remember about her response?
I don't remember exactly her response, but I remember she was trying to keep it together as best she could because she's in the middle of a task. The kids are still there.
Yeah.
And we basically just decided, okay, this is something that we need to talk about a little bit later when the time allows.
Did she fall apart?
I think falling apart is a very minimal way to describe what transpired for the next several months, even into a year after I had admitted that to her that night. She was a little confused by it at first because of the lies that I had told her previous, that I don't struggle in this.
Yeah.
She was very mad that I had lied to her all those times. She was mad and frustrated that had I said something prior, that it could have changed the struggles that we had already gone through in our marriage because of my lack of interest in her, because it was being fed somewhere else.
Yeah. Because how long were you married at this point?
We were married 10 years.
Okay. Wow. I realize that you're, right in the now you're looking at, I'm asking you to look at those first few months, that first year. Was it dicey? Was it touch and go? Did you guys commit to working on this? I realize there's so many different directions that could go, and it probably even changed somewhere along the line, maybe a time or two. What do you remember about those months in that first year?
From the moment that I admitted it to her, it was a very hard time for us. One of the first things after we had talked is she said, "You need to get with our pastor and you need to tell him, and we'll go from there. We'll get his advice and see what we need to do." So the very next day, I called up my pastor. He met me for lunch, and I just admitted it to him. And he in no way was enabling me in the situation, but he was almost comforting me in a sense to say, "Mike, this This is okay that you admitted this. This is actually a very normal thing for a lot of men. Either they have struggled with it at some point or they currently are. And he said, all age groups. So even though you're in your 30s and you're now admitting this, teenagers all the way up, he's like, Mike, I've had guys in their 60s and 70s tell me, finally admit that they're struggling with this. And then that kind of helps set us on a path to getting through this. So I went back to Erin after meeting with the pastor. We talked about all of the things that he had mentioned to me. We decided that we need to seek out counseling and we need to get some outside help here. And so we did. We went to see a counselor, and the gentleman was fantastic. He dove into both me and Erin because there was trauma and hurt on both sides. Yeah. He would even go far back into my childhood, and there were things that came up in my childhood that Erin didn't even know about. Stuff that some physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, things that kind of formulated who I became as an adult.
That'll mess you up.
Yeah. But seeing during the time that we were in and the hate, I mean, she even used the word, I hate you, Mike, during this process. Even though she hated me, she was able to sympathize with me and have some compassion from those moments as a child, things that I had gone through, things that kind of formed who I am as an adult. So those moments were good for us to be able to have some sort of hope that we can get through this, that she still loves me in a sense. Even though she says she hates me, there's still something deep inside of her that she can feel compassion for me. She can feel this love for me. She sees how hard I'm now working to overcome this. I've talked to my pastor. I've admitted to her. We were going to counseling. I now have Covenant Eyes on my phone. So I have all these things set up to show that I am seeking out accountability in this. There's 2 gentlemen that I go to church with that I'm now meeting every Thursday night. We have dinner together and we talk about hard stuff, and all these things are now in place. Even though we were doing all these good things and we were making these steps and these strides in these right directions, it was still very hard in our own personal life, within our marriage. The word divorce was brought up multiple times by Erin. We were both willing to push through it and get to the other side, but there were moments where it was very hard for her. Yeah. When I first admitted my addiction to her, I felt such a release, such a weight lifted off of me. And I thought, okay, this is great, right? This is the beginning of a great marriage. And
secret's out now.
Yeah. I had no idea that the weight that had been taken off of me was now placed directly onto her. And that's hard. In hindsight, looking back, I wish I had known that. Yeah. At the time, I was thinking, this is fantastic, right? I've admitted it. This is the beginning of the healing. This is the beginning of a great marriage, and this is going to be fantastic. To her, it was, oh my gosh, I've been lied to all this time. Where do we even go from here? Do I even want to live with this man anymore? I was not prepared for what was coming.
One of those instances where you realize that, it's like trust is earned over a lifetime, but can be completely dashed in a moment.
Yeah.
And you felt that.
Absolutely.
Moment.
And now I'm back in the situation of, I have to build this trust all up again.
Yeah. Did you question whether or not you could?
I did not, because I was fully committed to our relationship, our marriage. I was fully committed to staying clean and sober from pornography. And I knew that we can do this. So whenever she would bring up divorce, I would kind of cower and say, no, we can do this. We'll keep going to the counselor. This can work. Until finally one day she mentioned it again. And I said, you know what? Fine. If that's what you want, go get the papers. I'll sign them. After that moment, the word divorce was never brought up again. And we both realized how serious of a situation this is. The kids, the small children that we have that are going to be affected by this as well. And we're going to be in this for the long haul now. We're gonna tough this out. We're gonna make it work. We're gonna continue to seek counseling. We're going to seek outside help. We're going to push through, and we'll do whatever it takes to get to on the other side of this.
You hit the 1 year mark, and I know the date is very clear for you.
August 10th. Yes.
August 10th rolled around 1 year later. What was that day like for you? That you had lived through that first year.
So when August 10th came around, and it was 1 year from the time that I had admitted my pornography addiction to Erin, I was so excited. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've done this. I couldn't even go a couple days or a week before. And I went an entire year of not looking at pornography. Yeah. I was so excited. I thought, this is a great achievement. We need to celebrate this, right? So I go to Erin and I say, it's been 1 year. And it was met with much somber. She was not excited in the way that I was excited. She did not see it as an accomplishment and a feat like I saw it.
What did she say?
It was more of a sarcastic, well, congratulations. Like, this is not something that you need to be proud of. This is something you should have already been doing years ago. So we're not going to celebrate this.
Wow. That must have taken the wind out of your sails, at least for that day.
My balloon was deflated very quickly on that one. Yes.
So I hear a lot of optimism in what you're saying. Is that truly it? Is there a worry in your mind, in your heart at all, that you could relapse?
Every day. The temptation is always there. The temptation never goes away. And I thought that as time went on, that it would start to fade. Yeah. That the desire to look at pornography would fade, and it hasn't. I thought that it would get easier to say no, and it hasn't. I thought that even outside of looking at pornography, if there's like TV shows we're watching or movies that we're watching and a scene pops up and you see some nudity, that would not trigger me in a sense to want to act on that.
Right.
And it still does. And I don't know if that's just part of being a man. I don't know if that's part of just being a recovering addict of pornography. Yeah. But it's still there. It's still a constant struggle that I have to go through all the time to commit to saying no, to commit to not looking at it.
Okay. You have a son. What does it mean to you to raise that young man in the truth, with support, with love, that you know for sure he is going to go through the same temptations and dude talk that we all did? How do you view that mantle of raising that boy?
You had to ask me that question.
I did.
I know that my dad struggled with pornography when he was younger because my grandfather would buy him magazines. So then that tells me that my grandfather also struggled with it too.
Yeah.
And now I struggle with it. It's being passed down from generation to generation. So I now have an 8-year-old son who is about the same age as to when I was first exposed to a naked woman pornography.
Right.
So I think about him. And I think about this generational curse that has been on our family. And I do not want him to go through any of this. And I feel like, I'm hoping that at least, that I am breaking that from past generations, that what Erin and I have gone through, the struggle that we have had to endure, and my commitment to stay clean from this is enough to break this generational curse off to where my son and then his son will not have to go through this one day. Right. I'm not naive to think that he won't ever be exposed to nudity or pornography in any way, because we live in a fallen world and he's going to have friends and they're going to be.
You can only protect him so much.
Right. My hope is that when he is exposed to it, that he can come to me and talk to me about it. Yeah. That he will know that the situation that he's in is not morally right, but that there's freedom and that there's acceptance with me, that he can come and talk to me about it and not feel like that he has to stay isolated in the same sense that I was. Right. And if he does find himself stuck in it and it becomes an addiction, that he can tell me, and then I will know the steps now to take with him to get him the help that he needs to get out of it based off of my experience.
Right. Inevitably, I almost feel like it's a little bit of a softball question. I just believe that there are going to be men who listen to this podcast. There are going to be women in marriage, in deep addiction, in isolation, and a spouse that's suspecting it. All those things that you've lived through. Is there a way that you can say to them, I don't even know how I want to preface this for you. How would you talk to somebody? One of your buddies comes to you and confesses.
Yeah.
What direction do you send them?
What a very hard place to be, is what I would say. And there's a hard road ahead to get out of this. What the turning point was for me was hearing that message from that pastor in Oklahoma when he was talking specifically to the women and said, hey, when your man, when your husband, your boyfriend would come to you and they tell you this, here's how you need to respond to them.
Yeah.
Because that was the biggest thing for me to keep it continually hidden, was the fact that if I tell my wife this, that's it.
Yeah.
So knowing
You're
that
digging your own grave.
Yes. So knowing that she had already heard this message, knowing that she was kind of prepped in a sense, this is my opportunity to come clean. So what I would say to a married couple who is struggling with this or may not even know that their spouse is struggling with this, set the groundwork up to be, for the wife, I guess, to be accepting, to be loving, knowing that you're probably about to hear some hard stuff.
Yeah.
Things that you may have been lied to about before that wasn't happening. It may be deeper than you ever thought it was. But if your husband is willing to come forward and have the courage to admit his problem, to commit to coming clean, staying clean, going to counseling, meeting with the people that he needs to meet with, and even as a couple. I mean, that was huge for us, for Erin and I, to go together to counseling and experience that. Please stand by him. I know it's going to hurt. I know it's going to be hard. I know there's going to be hate. There's going to be, the word divorce could be brought up like it was with us. But in the end, if you guys can hang through it, hang tough, there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is hope. There is redemption. There is a healed and whole marriage to be had at the end. For me, it was just the biggest thing of knowing that my wife is going to accept this and she's going to put in the work with me, even though it's not her problem. It's not something that she signed up for in marriage. She didn't know it was coming. But when we get married, part of our vows is, through thick and thin, through the good times and the bad, right? So these are the thick times. These are the hard times. So if you're willing to hear those hard things and still love your husband through it, there can be healing. There can be redemption. There can be a very healthy and successful marriage. Redemption
is what I'm hoping people hear through this series. And I think we've laid a pretty good groundwork here in your story and how it has been redeemed, but there's no redemption without Jesus in the mix. You received forgiveness from your wife. You received help from community. Where was God in the issue and the answer? So like I mentioned before, from the time I was a little kid, I was saved in my grandmother's kitchen by my grandmother when I was 5 years old. Consistently grew up in a Christian home, very Christian loving, conservative home my entire life. I went to Christian school from kindergarten all the way through high school, worked at our church when I was in high school and then shortly after, then even transitioned to a bigger nonprofit Christian organization. So my entire life was in this bubble of Christianity. You're steeped. Yes. Knowing right from wrong, knowing what I should and shouldn't do morally, and this pornography being one of them. Yeah. And yet I still did it.
So even though I was mired in that and living that day in and day out with God all around me, and I would go to church and I would worship and I would feel his presence and he was close to me. And there were moments in my life where everything around me was crumbling and God was the only person that I could turn to in those moments.
Yeah.
He still met me where I was, even in the midst of my addiction. He still loved me. There were moments in my life where I cried out to him. And there was one moment that I can remember vividly that I was still in high school. My parents weren't home. I took a DVD that I had and I took it in the backyard and I lit it, or I poured lighter fluid all over it. And as I was lighting it on fire, I was on my knees, bawling my eyes out, praying to God, this is it. This is the moment where I am now free of this.
Yeah.
I totally believe it. I trust you. I've been in church my whole life. I know you can do this. I know I can be set free of this. This is it.
Yeah.
And I while I was watching it burning and the tears streaming down my face, I truly felt like, I will never have to look at pornography or struggle with it ever again. And about a week later, I was back in it. So even though my struggle was consistent and I knew I shouldn't be doing it, God was still ever present through that entire process. He still met me where I was. He still loved me where I was. I felt it. I felt in those moments of worship, in those moments of crying out to him, that he was right there with me.
Yeah.
So he never left me, even when we got to the point of our marriage. And then sometimes hearing other people talk about their struggle with pornography, it would come up every once in a while. You'd hear it.
Yeah.
It wasn't often. And thinking, man, I would like to be free of that. But how do I truly get there?
Yeah.
How can I get on the other side of this? So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, does that speak to just what a deep, deep hold that this issue was for you? This, you talked about maybe it's just a phase going back into your teenage life. Mm-hmm. It's so much worse than that, right?
It is. And that was the misconception that I had, and maybe a way to justify what I was doing is, this is just a phase while I'm in high school. And then once I get out of high school, when I get older and more mature, this will start to fade away and go away and I'll be free of this. And that was very naive of me looking back now, knowing that decades later, I'm still in this phase, quote unquote, It's much more than that. It's much deeper than that. It is a hold that the devil had on me in such a way to not only keep me in pornography, but to keep me isolated, to keep me fearful if someone's going to find out about this, to keep me in shame, because I know I've grown up in a Christian home. I know I shouldn't be doing this. Yeah. So now he's trying to set up this false barrier between me and God of, as long as you're doing this, your prayers won't be answered. You can't get help from him if, with things you're struggling with because you're doing this. Yeah. And then it transferred to my marriage. And he was attempting to destroy our marriage. Had our marriage been destroyed, we would not be sharing our story now in the way that we are. Yeah. And I have to be honest with you, this is not easy to talk about.
Oh, of course
I was
not.
very nervous to come talk to you about this today. It's not an easy thing to admit and know that this is now going to go out, on the very internet that was keeping me in addiction to pornography. But I think it's needed. When she came to me and said, Mike, I'd like to share this, I have to be honest and tell you there was a moment of hesitation. And I thought, okay, well, now you can talk about everything else that we've struggled with, but not this topic, right? And then I quickly came to the conclusion that no, she needs to talk about this too, because we decided we're going to be an open book. And if our story can help just one other couple, then it's worth it. Whatever amount of shame or however people look at me differently now at my workplace or my circle of friends or whatever it is, that pales in comparison to the people that we could potentially help by sharing our story. Yeah. So I can't help how other people may not look at me or talk about me. That's between them and God. And I just have to do what we feel as a couple is best moving forward.
Next time on The Nook, Dirty Little Secret Part 2, The Reaction.
It was like a surreal moment. It was as if I was watching myself experience this. I have never hated somebody in my life. These emotions started welling up in me that, like, I had pure hate.
Mike's wife, Erin, talks about the effects of more than 10 years of lies and deception coming to light.
All of the thoughts I've ever had about myself about not being good enough or pretty enough for this man are now a reality. We had been married 11 years, together for 13 at that point. That wasn't enough. He always needed a second thing because I wasn't going to cut it.
Make sure that you are subscribed to The Nook on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss any of this series. My email address is included in the show notes if you have any questions or comments about this episode. Thank you for joining me today, and I will catch you here next time in The Nook.
The Nook Podcast is a production of Sozo Digital Media.